quite welcome. It's great to see you here this afternoon and to welcome Professor Jorge Garcia, professor at Boston College since 2000. In case you haven't heard yet, the Humanities Forum is a space for intellectual engagement beyond the classroom and across the college. And I'm very happy to be part of the advisory board of this forum. It's an initiative of Raymond Hain, my colleague from the philosophy department. And I'm glad to see some new faces here today at the forum. And we are very glad to have this space because we can get together within the college, but we can also invite really interesting people from outside of the college. And one of those people is Jorge Garcia, who's taught at all the big Catholic institutions that you could possibly teach at here in the United States. He's been professor at Georgetown from 1993 to 2000. He was a professor at Notre Dame from 1980 to 1989. He was a visiting professor at MIT. So he's been to many great places, and he's written a lot of very interesting things, mostly in the area of normative theory and race theory, philosophy of race. So I was actually discussing with him how one should categorize his work, and I used a term, social ontology, that's now in vogue, and he said, oh yeah, that's what they call it now. Basically, he was working on interesting issues that are continually being rebranded before they were branded in that way. And he's going to raise some very interesting and fundamental questions, which I think will be useful for you in your studies and for us in multiplicity of disciplines. So without further ado, one last thing. We're going to have a reception at around 4:15, and that would be a place where you could interact with Professor Garcia or not, or just go and get something to eat. But we want to warmly invite everybody who's here to also come to the reception. So now, Professor Garcia.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Professor Hain, Professor King, and the department for. Is that okay? Can you hear me? For inviting me, and Providence College for hosting me so splendidly. And I want to thank all of you for coming. So as Professor King said, this is, the kind of stuff that I'm doing here is sometimes classified as social ontology. There are other terms that are used. I guess it might be considered at the edges of philosophy of social science, although I don't really claim to be working in or on social science, so I don't really prefer that terminology. Some people talk about group metaphysics, but I take it that's just another way of talking about social ontology, or it seems to mean about the same thing. I've been doing some work in a somewhat growing area of philosophical interest, which has come to be called philosophy of race. Most of my work has been on the concept and the ethics of racism, but I've also am working on some other stuff which isn't yet published on other ethical aspects of race, the concept of racial loyalty and its justification and nature, and so on, racial solidarity, and so on. In the course of that work, one frequently comes across the claim that races are social constructs. That's very widely affirmed. It's seldom analyzed, and my impression anyway is from what I've read that the defenses of it tend to be fairly haphazard. And so that brought me into a study of the nature of social construction. And that was what I was originally planning to present today. Basically, what that project does is just take the concept of social construction pretty seriously and ask about it, what it is. When social construction occurs, what agents have to engage in what process, working with what materials, in what conditions, so as to construct what sorts of things, entities. So to get an idea as to who has to do what, on the input side, the nature or central side, with the process, and then to use that to get an account as to what the products of social construction are, with an eye to trying to delimit those, to see what can and what cannot plausibly be held to be a social construct. So I'm skeptical of the claim that races are social constructs, and I'll try to articulate some of that skepticism in this talk. If you have questions at the end about the talk itself, obviously, and take those, but also if you have questions about the background view of social construction, which is not really in this presentation, we could talk a little bit about that too. That's somewhat more interesting to me and somewhat more general. Nowadays, it is a commonplace within social theory and even the consensus opinion that races, including your race and mine, are social constructs. Natalia Molina, social scientist, titles her recent book, How Race is Made in America. I talked with her about this at a conference a few years ago. This title assumes quite a bit, that races are made or built, that is constructed, and that this can be and is done in different ways, that is how race is made, in different places. What she's talking about, I think, are the various ways many Americans today think about race, what it is, who has a race and why, what the various races are, including how many there are, what it takes to be in this race or that, and so on. Besides all that, of course, she is interested in the impact of these ways of thinking on the thinkers themselves and on other people's lives and prospects. The images of construction are today so common among intellectuals that this historian moves right to them in addressing her topics without really pausing much to talk about just what social construction is. What justifies this confidence in the aptness and utility of this image of constructing? Though it is widely claimed within the academy and without that races are socially constructed, such claims are seldom explicated with much care. Perhaps that is because they have become so commonplace as no longer to be controversial, and so it is no longer deemed important for us to examine them critically. That is unfortunate and misguided, since without a philosophically adequate account and analysis of construction, its possible agents, process, materials, preconditions, and products, those claims really can't be adequately substantiated. While its roots can be traced much earlier, the idea that races are socially constructed gained traction and wide acceptance after, and partly because of, the publication of Michael Omi and Howard Winant's 1986 book, Racial Formation in the United States. There, the two sociologists maintain that racial formation is, quote, a process by which social, economic, and political forces determine the content and importance of racial categories, and by which they are in turn shaped by racial meanings. Its influence notwithstanding, their account is deeply problematic. What makes any such formation to be a racial one? Why accept their presupposition that having a race is impossible in the absence of social hierarchy and even oppression? What does formation theory do with the fact that the very term race itself is historically tied to reproduction, to breeding? So, a section on social construction. The most thorough and persuasively elaborated understandings of paradigmatic instances of construction are our construction of money, or of judges, or of professors and college students, for example. And they take construction to consist of a group of people agreeing, that is, sharing the intent to bind relevant established and designated intra-institutional authorities and personnel to treat and count various people as having certain responsibilities, claims, immunities, and forms of authority within practices and institutions that they have set up. I take those to be paradigmatic instances of construction because it's obvious that nothing is money just by its nature. No one is a judge just by his nature. No one is a professor or a college student just by nature. Rather, we have to, first of all, set up, build the institutions within which somebody occupies that role and really fills and can pursue or its function and so on, the role assigned one. The work of the philosopher John Searle is, in my view, I think, but it's hard to see somebody questioning that, the most important theorizing of social construction. And as he saw early on, the form X counts as Y in circumstance C well serves to capture the shape of what is going on in this area. However, what he perceived only dimly is that this occurs fundamentally at the level of types, not of individuals. Thus, it is only because, say, canvas bags of this size and shape count, that is, they are to be treated as, and thus are bases within the game of baseball, that this particular bag is, say, first base in this game that you and I are playing here this afternoon, or that the Red Sox and Indians are playing in about an hour, I think. I don't know. Attention to this type instance distinction is crucial for properly grasping and applying Searle's canonical form, X counts as Y in C, for the rules that constitute certain institutions and their components. Right, so what John Searle So John Searle, adapting really some ideas from the relatively young John Rawls, the John Rawls before theory of justice and all of that, Rawls had noticed a distinction between two kinds of rules, rules of the road that tell you what to do, but also what he called constitutive rules that make up certain kinds of practices or institutions. Searle, building on that idea and also on the work of his own teacher, J.L. Austin, takes this notion of constitutive rules and proposes this canonical form. So for him, the canonical form of a constitutive rule is, for example, that some X, say a baseball thrown into a certain region of space or through a certain region of space, counts as a strike in the game of baseball in C, that is, in certain circumstances. So there has to be a game going on. The person who throws it has to be the pitcher. Time has to be in, right? And so on. The pitcher has to be standing in the right place. So there are all these circumstances, but if you do this, if the designated person does this in the designated circumstances and so on, then that counts as a strike. so that, for instance, that batter is now that much closer to striking out. So what is true that within the institution and at the level of type uh, is that the rules provide that any relevant X is a Y within specified conditions. Thus, okay, that's just what I was just talking about. What is also true is that because even officials can make mistakes in applying the rules, something can wind up being counted as a Y, some X can, when it isn't really a Y, and it can be a Y when the relevant people fail so to recognize and count it. These facts are important for the phenomena of persons wrongly convicted of crimes, of people passing for white or black, being called out despite the fielders missing a tag. These cases are structurally similar. And despite what is sometimes said, careful accounts of social construction can, in principle, accommodate all of them. Even a convincing-looking counterfeit bill is still not money, even if its appearance tricks people into accepting it as legal tender. That is because it does not have the specific characteristics of origin and so on that the rules require of genuine money. It is treated by some people as if it were money, but even if their error is never detected, it isn't. These are not the sort of bills that our rules obligate people to treat as money. Rather, even though few know this in our scenario, they are things of a type that those same rules forbid people to treat as money. Notice that the rules always operate at the level of types, never that of individuals. They constitute anything that is an X in C as also a Y, and they may also say that only an X within C can be a Y. They don't themselves specify that this or that individual X is a Y. This makes clear that we need to distinguish social construction in a narrow constitutive sense, according to which being money or a baseball pitcher or an appellate judge and so on consists in being assigned by largely other people a role status within an institution or practice from a causal sense in which something results from social behavior. My own view is that we should restrict our use of the term construction to the former case, that is, to social constitution. There's little point, in my view, to saying that climate change or air pollution or poverty are socially constructed. Unlike money or pitchers, they don't consist in forms of normative status generated from people's agreements. We should just call them partly causally caused. Partly socially caused. This approach would allow a social constructionist about race to say that someone is mistakenly counted as a member of race R when she is mistakenly believed to have certain physical properties or a certain ancestral background. Properly understood, social construction does not preclude mistaken identifications, whether of pitches, criminals, or black people. A sophisticated account of race as a social construction eschews the simplistic formula, S is an R just when she's thought to be or treated as an R. That is something that's said more than a little in the literature of social construction. To be an X is just to be, or to be a Y rather, is just to be thought to be a Y. But it's not hard to see that immediately. First of all, that's circular, so it can't serve as an adequate analysis since you already have to, since you're using the term you're trying to analyze in the proposed analysis. But here there's a different problem, that something can be treated as a Y even when it isn't a Y. A black person who's passing for white has to be, by the nature of what passing is supposed to be as a phenomenon, somebody who is black but who is thought to be white, right? So it can't be that being thought to be white is enough to make you white, because then somebody couldn't be black but while mistakenly thought to be white. Right, and similarly, something couldn't be accepted as real money, even though it's really counterfeit money, right? If it's treated as money on that sort of simplistic account, it is money. So therefore, if you've got a very good counterfeiter, the counterfeiter makes actual legitimate money. But that's just, I take it absurd. So while I don't think that race is in fact a social construct, I realize I haven't given any reasons against it yet, Walter Ben Michaels argues too hastily when he holds that the acknowledged phenomenon of a black person's passing for white proves that proves false Adrian Piper's attempted race constructionism. So Walter Ben Michaels, a literary critic, tries to argue against Adrian Piper, a philosopher and actually also a visual and performing artist, but here she's doing philosophical work. She wants to say that race is a construction. As a matter of fact, she wants to say that all race is construction. Her main article on this topic is called, she's a very light-skinned black woman who used to sort of toy with people who would come up to her thinking that she's white and say all sorts of things that they wouldn't have said to her if they knew that she was black. So her article is called Passing for White, Passing for Black. So she wants to say, yes, she does sometimes pass for white. She's a black person. But she also wants to say that actually her being a black person is also, in a sense, a kind of artifice. So she's a constructionist. And what Walter Ben Michaels was saying was that that position is inconsistent because if you're just a constructionist, you must think that people's treating you as black makes you black. People's treating you as white makes you white. But then there can't be people who are black but pass as white because they get treated or regarded as white, but they're not. So that was Walter Ben Michaels' criticism. The only point I'm making here is that I think what that does show is that a racial constructionist needs a more sophisticated account of what the social construction of race would consist in, but I don't think that that argument by itself shows that race isn't or can't be a social construct. I will try to give some reasons against that claim, though, that race is a social construct. A constructionist about race could consistently hold that someone, for example, the famous, whether or not fictional, Clotel, is genuinely black because the social rules and historical facts combine to make that true, though many people mistakenly think her white, because they are mistaken about those facts, especially about her ancestors' say, geographic origins. Right? So I want to say that passing for white is in that sense like being falsely convicted of a crime. The fact that everybody treats you as guilty doesn't mean that you're guilty. Right? What the rules say is that if you are guilty of committing this crime, only if you have in fact performed these actions in this way. So thus, although we can be constructionists about the law, we can also say that some people are falsely convicted, or as some people prefer to put it, wrongly convicted, which I think is also okay, or wrongfully convicted, although that strikes me as fishier. Why many people theorists think that race is socially constructed. Thinkers have been drawn to the idea that race is social in our thinking and our life together rather than something physical or natural in our bodies by observing the changes in racial beliefs over time and their variation across places and societies. And there are a lot of them. Among the variations found are the number of races, right, so different groups recognize different numbers of races. The conceptual basis of race, notice there are two main ways of classifying the races. One is continentally, the African race, the European race, the American race, the Asian race, and the other is skin color. So the black race, the white race, the red race, and the yellow race. right? Those are supposed to be different ways of describing the same phenomena, though it's not hard to see that they, in fact, diverge for lots of people. The criteria for assigning someone to this or that race, that varies from time to time. The implications of such classification, for example, does your belonging to one race suffice to exclude your also belonging to another race, right? So something like the one-drop rule and the exclusion rule. And also those criteria's own vagueness and determinacy. If a red person, a member of the red race, is somebody whose skin is red, how red? If a black person, a member of the black race, is somebody whose skin is black, how black? Or how close to black, right? So those are just problems of indeterminacy. But notice also the same problems arise for the continental groupings. Where, for example, does Asia end at its western border and Europe begin, such that we can classify people as belonging to the Asian race or the or say the European race? Just reading something recently about, I think maybe the Tsarnaev brothers, soon to be immortalized on the silver screen, for bombing the Boston Marathon, that they were, yes, the movie Patriots Day is opening soon, that they were classified by some people as anti-white, as being people of color, and someone else pointed out that, yeah, but of course one of the old terms for white people was Caucasian, and the Caucasus is roughly where they came from. So, so there are these problems in trying to determine what the races are, how many there are, and so on. And of course, there are people who just don't fit in. For example, the autochthonous peoples of Australia have very dark skin, but they're certainly not members of the African race. And similarly, there are questions about how to classify, as I said, the people of Western Asia, the people of Pacific Islands, and so on. Okay, so you get the point. So one of the things that draws people to say that races are socially constructed is that there's all this indeterminacy, and different people answer these questions in different places at different times. Hence the idea is, so it must all just be a matter of social decision, something that we just make up. Moreover, many people think what is enduring in racial beliefs, so far we've been talking about variations, that many people think that what is enduring in racial beliefs and treatment is their social impact, and their ties to systems of economic and political oppression and hierarchy. Thus, what is enduring in race also appears to be social. Reflection on both of these facts, both what varies in our racial thinking and what seems to remain constant, makes it easier to see why many people have proceeded to the conclusion that races must be social inventions and determinations rather than non-social parts of some pre-existing reality. Okay, now let's look at some recent, I think, philosophically sophisticated accounts of race as a social construction. Linda Martín Alcoff, a Latin American philosopher and feminist theorist as well, social ontologist, writes that she takes race to be a very real aspect of social identity, one that is marked on the body through learned perceptual practices of visual categorization with significant social and political effects, as well as psychological impact on self-formation, that is, one's forming a self. An identity that nonetheless changes meanings, as she puts it, through agency that is always collective. So if it's collective agency, I take that to be social construction. This is in her book, Visible Identities. Sally Haslinger, another feminist philosopher and again social ontologist, and student of Aristotle, sees what she calls gender as the meaning of sex, and using that, similarly understands gender as the social meaning of sex, and uses that then to formulate her own view that race is the social meaning assigned to what she broadly calls color, but what she means are various bodily markers: skin color, the breadth of nose and lips, the curliness of the hair, the prominence of cheekbones, the skin formation around the eyes, and so on. The things that what sometimes are called gross morphological features, by gross meaning visible to the naked eye, that people use in assigning somebody to this race or that. For Haslinger, quote, races are those groups demarcated by geographical associations accompanying perceived body type, when those associations take on evaluative significance concerning how members of those groups should be viewed and treated, unquote. Though the conspicuous physical traits may be treated merely as markers of deeper hidden traits of character or of intellect, especially bad character and low intellect, that the racially oppressive ideology, as she puts it, uses to justify the treatment. Okay, so that's another, I take it, much more sophisticated social constructionist account. Certainly Sally classifies it as a social constructionist account. Let's look at one more in a little bit of detail, and then very briefly another comment on all of this. The social scientist Glenn Lowry suggests that, quote, we adopt the linguistic convention that when saying person A belongs to race X, what we mean is person A possesses physical traits which, in a given society, at a fixed point in history, under the conventions of racial classification extant there and then, will cause him to be classified by a preponderance of those whom he encounters in that society and or by himself as belonging to race X. Continuing, Lowry adds, this is a pragmatic judgment on my part. That last part is a little puzzling, but as he says, he's suggesting this to us. He says we should adopt this linguistic convention. He's not really simply trying to describe ordinary usage or language. Notice, though, I guess we'll come back to this at some point, that's kind of a long analysis or sentence, but it really comes down to just a variant of the one that we were talking about before. To be a member of Group G is just to be thought to be a member of Group G. He throws in a lot of other terms, but we should adopt the linguistic convention that you are a person, that you belong to race X, just if blah, 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 you're thought of as belonging to race X. Finally, the education writer and philosopher Lawrence Blum rejects the claim that races are social constructs, chiefly because he thinks that different people mean different things by this term. Recently, he has suggested 3 senses of social construction, in one of which, what he calls the falsehood sense, constructions as such do not exist at all. They're not real. In another of which, the social sense, as he puts it, they exist as social but not natural entities or realities. And in the third of which, the contingency use, I take it that he's not distinguishing uses from senses, which Blum sees as a subset of the social sense, to say something is a construct is to emphasize its historical contingency. That is, its status as what he calls a product of human culture, convention, and decision. Okay, so those are some of the recent philosophical grounds for saying that race is a social construct. What are some problems for these views? Any such view as these, however, faces serious difficulties. First, constructivist accounts risk being viciously circular. Recall Lowry's pragmatic suggestion of a linguistic convention that we construe saying person A belongs to race X as a claim that person A possesses physical traits, blah, 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 that will cause him to be classified, blah, 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 as belonging to race X. As we mentioned, Walter Ben Michaels made a similar criticism of Piper's view. I suggested above that social constructionists can evade this criticism, but if they're going to do that, they need to be more careful in their formulations than many have been, and that care means more than just adding complication, which is what I think Lowry does. It won't do just to say that to belong to group X is just to be thought to belong to group X. But a slightly more complicated version of just that account is what Lowry offers. That doesn't evade such a view's manifest circularity in defining a concept in terms of itself. By the way, we should note that the same problem afflicts other accounts as well. Biological accounts can also have an element of the circular. J. Angelo Corlett, Mexican-American, I guess he would probably call himself Chicano, philosopher in California, who wrote an article on Latino identity, says that a major part of what makes someone to be a Latino is her having Latino ancestors. And of course, he's onto something, but that can't be an analysis of what it is to be a Latino for the same reasons, right? The term to be analyzed appears in the proposed analysis. Okay, so that's one problem for social constructionists, although I did suggest that it does seem to me to be, in principle, a problem that can be avoided. Second, the term race and the related concept of race have historically been tied to reproductively transmitted features, both conspicuous and hidden. However, making ancestry suffice for race membership and then allowing races and their more specific membership conditions to be constructed by societies and thus vary across them is implausible, for it entails that someone's race can change as she moves from one place to another, or as other people change their own views or her society's power relations, and that she may both belong to a race and not belong to it at the same time if different standards both apply. It's counterintuitive thus to make race a two-place predicable and allow racial change to occur as merely as a form of what some philosophers used to call a Cambridge change, that is, a change that consists simply in a change of your relational properties, such that you change if right now I'm looking at you and right now I'm not, right? Right? That doesn't really seem to be a serious sense in which you change, although something is true of you at one time that isn't true of you at another. Well, if similarly having a race is a matter of being, whatever, caught up in certain kinds of social power relations, then as the society changes, presumably your race changes. Maybe your race, maybe the power relations reverse or are eliminated, or maybe other people just start thinking differently. It seems perfectly plausible to say that relevant changes like that in virtue of relevant changes like that, you can become a student and then stop being a student. Say you weren't a student at Providence College, then maybe right now you are a student at Providence College, and then, God willing, at a certain point you'll stop being a student at Providence College, right? That's the kind of change that obviously is a matter of your social relations with others and with certain institutions. It's odd to see race like that your race is something that you acquire at a certain point in your life that you have for a while, and then as things around you change, you stop having. Indeed, construction makes race relative. Its construction would make race relative in such a way that it really denies that a person belonging to a certain race, maintaining instead that she always belongs to this race according to this system of racial classification. And that is perhaps better interpreted as denying the reality of races rather than as a kind of realism. This is an issue, by the way, that I think just many more than a few anyway, people in the literature wrestle with. Naomi Zak, a philosopher out in Oregon, a philosopher especially of mixed race, well, that itself is a problem, right? Naomi Zak insists that there aren't any races and then insists that some people are mixed race. Well, that already is problematic. And in one of her books, the first chapter is Why There Are No Races, and I think the second chapter is Race is a Social Reality. Well, wait, had she read the first chapter? There aren't any races, right? So it can't be any kind of reality if they just don't exist. Of course, what she meant was that race isn't a natural, why there are no races out in nature, but rather races are just these social entities. But it seems to me that certain ways of construing race as purely social really amount to saying that there aren't any races at all, or else they're proposing such a radical reconception of the notion of race as to really constitute a kind of eliminationism of race. Third, while it is true that races are often correlated with various social expectations, the fact of social expectation does not imply that people ought to act in such ways as to fulfill those expectations. Allowing race membership to subject someone to others' expectations oppresses her by yoking her to out-group or to in-group stereotypes and quite possibly unjust demands. This is further complicated by denying any difference between analytic and synthetic judgments. I won't go into that one. But the point remains that normative expectations are peripheral to ethno-racial assignments. They're not their core. Of course, different social meanings assigned the same racial classification by different persons will often conflict. If, however, these opposed claims and norms are all of them parts of what it is to be black or white or Asian, etc., and if I am black or white or Asian and so on, then it follows that contradictory claims are true of me, and the conflicting intra-institutional virtues and duties are all of them incumbent on me. Some thinkers acknowledge and wrestle with that problem. So Sally Haslinger, who I already cited, who's primarily a theorist of sex and gender, has taken the strong view that what we really need to do is to eliminate women, which is an odd thing for a feminist, a militant feminist to say. But her view is that to be a woman is really to be a subordinate within a certain kind of social structure. So what we need to do is to undo that social structure. But once you undo the social structure, there will no longer be subordinates within it, so there won't be any women anymore. She does allow that you can try instead to change what it is to be a woman, but that's really to replace being a woman with being something else on her own account, I would take it, being a woman star or woman sub one or something like that. That is some new social meaning to be assigned to the concept of woman. And notice, even as part of that, you still have to stop, we'd still have to get people to stop being women, period, in order to become this new thing, a woman in this new social arrangement. I don't know that Sally has, Sally herself has wavered some on that. She's backed off from that some. She's, as a militant feminist now, somewhat more open to the possibility that we can continue to have women in the world. And I don't know that she has applied that view to race. Probably she's somewhat more sensitive and realizes the sensitivity of her position as a white person and saying, so what we really need to do is get rid of black people. She's willing to say, or was willing to say, we should get rid of women, because as a woman, she could clarify that. As for a white person, say we should get rid of black people has a bad feel to it. So she has avoided going to that extreme in her own views. Arguably, it can happen that someone's race membership or assignment may so situate her that she may incur special rights or duties. For example, duties of gratitude to those whose sacrifices to end racial injustices have benefited her. That seems to me perfectly plausible. I remember hearing Randall Kennedy at Harvard Law School, and this shows up in at least one of his books too, talking about how he feels so bad for his black students at Harvard Law who feel that they should go into, civil rights law or poverty law or doing something, that might, help many black people. And, he's always remonstrating with them, telling them, just, do whatever it is that you find yourself most comfortable with. But I'm not sure why he thinks that. I mean, people have made sacrifices enabling black and white people, for that matter, have made sacrifices and done a lot to enable black and white people to go to Harvard Law School. I don't think that's particularly unreasonable to think that there, some debt of gratitude incurred. Now, exactly how to discharge it is funny. If the people is tricky, right? If the people who did it are dead, but it seems to me one reasonable way of trying to honor the people who have helped you and who are really trying to help people like you, and they've now succeeded in you, is, for example, to take up their cause. So if what they were trying to do was to help black people, and you're the beneficiary of the things they did to help black people, a reasonable way of paying them back might be to try to help black people. I don't think that makes me particularly a militant race man, but I don't get why Randall Kennedy finds that so oppressive or destructive that he has to try to talk his students out of it. Anyway, so I'm perfectly open to the possibility that history and the legacy of history can place people in such a position that their race or putative race membership can affect their actual moral rights and duties. Still, it's not true that being black or white or whatever consists in people having various rights or duties. Whereas I do want to say that somebody's being a judge or a student or a teacher or a baseball umpire or a second baseman and so on, that consists in occupying a role which is having certain kinds of duties and so on. So part of the claim that I'm trying to make is that the paradigmatic instances of social construction should give us a concept of construction, which I think we can devise and articulate, but a conception that also restricts what plausibly can be held to be a product of construction, such that races, it seems to me, are not the kinds of things, nor I think are genders, but that's not my topic here, or sexes, that are not the kinds of things that can be themselves socially constructed. So imagine this kind of case. Compare the utterance, S is a Martian. Right, okay, so I'm trained in philosophy, so therefore I have to come up with bizarre off the examples, right? Compare the utterance, S is a Martian, like now we're getting even if most of us thought that Martians are superior and entitled to rule the universe, when we call someone a Martian, we would be talking about her planetary origin, not about her value, her rights, or her duties. And note further that any principles applied to establish these duties themselves need moral, and therefore I would think race-independent and extra-institutional justification. Try to draw towards a close here. Ian Hacking's account of social construction, Ian Hacking is a philosopher of mainly natural science, but also has written on philosophy of social science and has written a book on more than one work, a book, but also a collection of essays on social construction. I think what he calls historical ontology is his term for what Professor King was calling social ontology. His account of social construction stresses feedback loops, as he calls them, wherein how a group is classified by others begins to affect its members' self-conceptions and self-description. Hacking is unclear just how this relates to social construction, but plainly he thinks it is somehow central. but against hacking, and also against many Foucauldians, that is, followers of the French postmodernist or deconstructionist philosopher Michel Foucault. Whether someone is a woman refugee, that's one of hacking's examples, whether someone performs a homosexual act, that's related to one of Foucault's examples, and so on, is independent of whether she has the concept of woman or the concept of homosexual act, and also of whether she acts because she thinks of herself as a woman or a refugee, or even the act as a homosexual one. Similarly, her society need not have such concepts, let alone apply them to her or to her conduct. The designation depends simply on unconstructed facts about where she came from and under what circumstances, and also about what someone does, and whether that fits our classification scheme. So Foucault sometimes suggests that the concept of homosexuality was only invented fairly late in the history of Christianity, and infers from that that nobody was a homosexual before that, because nobody had the concept of being a homosexual. I mean, he does allow that some men did stuff with other men, and some women did things with other women of a sexual nature, but none of that was homosexuality, because the concept hadn't been devised. And I just think that that's a weird, it's a weird conclusion and a strange assumption. Moreover, there's a further problem with it, that unless he sharply limits that principle, it will destroy his own position, because the concept of social construction was only invented well into the 20th century, and so if we have to have the concept of social construction in order to engage in social construction, that means that there hasn't been any social construction during all the time that he wants to say all this stuff was being socially constructed, right? So Foucault's position that you can't do X unless you have the concept of doing X has to be limited, because it'll otherwise follow that nobody could engage in social construction unless they had the concept of social construction, but nobody had the concept of social construction in the West until probably at least Hobbes, and maybe not till well after that, maybe not to Omi and Wynand or somebody, I don't know, or Berger and Luckman. So they'll get into trouble with that one. Let me try to finish this up. I raise problems for Blum's claim that there are three kinds of construction. Maybe he only means that there are three kinds of constructionist talk, and in any case, I agree with him that constructionist talk is in various ways so complicated and murky that it's best. I don't think that's necessarily best not to use it. I just think that's best not to apply it in these kinds of cases. I don't think that talk about construction of judges and money and baseball and so on, or students, is complicated in the same way. Discussed a little bit about Charles Mills, who wants to say, well, he has a qualified claim. He says that races are constructed, but they're constructed as social identities, which then tangles race or social construction up with identity theory, which I think probably doesn't do a lot to help it, because identity theory is also very problematic, and different people think of social identities in different ways. Some people say that to have a social identity as, say, a black person, you have to identify as black, but then what does that mean? If I check off a form, if I check off the box black on a form that asks what race I am, then I've identified myself as black, but that doesn't mean that being black means a whole lot to me, which is what identity theorists mean. Sometimes they say that you have to identify with being black, but if that's just cognitive, it seems to turn back into the thinking of yourself as black stuff, or that concept, or else it's somehow cognitive that being black means a lot to you. Well, but it might mean a lot to you as relevant to some issues, but not particularly as relevant to others. And also there's a question as to in what ways it means a lot to you. Discussed a little bit about Eric Erickson. Let me just jump to the and if races are not social constructions, what are they, and do they exist at all? My answer in that section is I don't know. That is, the thesis here is just a negative one. Many people try to solve the problems about race by saying that race is a social construction, but my suggestion is that that's not a good way of solving the problems about race. There's been quite a bit of philosophical literature lately on what races are and whether they exist. So there are different views. There has been some effort to recapture race as a biological term. Some people want to say it's not biological, but it's something different. Maybe it's not so much biological, but it still could be natural. Maybe I want to say that if it's biological, it has to be of some scientific importance. I don't want to say that, but nevertheless, it could still be in some way be natural, even if it's not scientific. Other people do, they use population genetics and so-called clade theory to try to defend race as a biological concept. So I'm not taking any stance on that, on whether races exist, but I do want to say that if races exist, they have to be somehow more natural rather than social. So maybe a final observation. Social construction of races and other categories is often advocated. So my discussion so far has been conceptual, but I just wanted to just gesture towards the normative. Social construction of races and other categories is often advocated on the assumption that it's liberatory. It shows that races, having supposedly been made by us to be as they are, we can now refashion them according to our current favored political agendas, especially liberatory agendas, however we think of liberation. But this is a non sequitur, and it's a dangerous one at that. So part of the stuff I skipped points out that Thomas Hobbes, who is sometimes seen as one of the very first constructionists, because he thinks that people contract to make society and to make governments, also believes that it's not simply up to us whether we make society or not, or we can make it as we like. He thinks there's a natural law that you have to escape the state of nature by making society, and moreover, society has to have this kind of shape rather than that kind of shape in order to do the work that natural law impels you to try to do. So Hobbes, who is a sort of early proto-constructionist, shows that constructionism need not be liberatory. That doesn't just mean that, if this is something we can make, then we can just, either decide not to make it or just remake it entirely. Even if society could reshape its groupings, this need do nothing to liberate human individuals whose freedom is what chiefly matters. To the contrary, it could mean everything that you are, what you are in your very identity, lies within the power of your neighbor to determine. So we do well to remember that we human persons are not society's creations. Society, is our creation. And liberals, by which I mean those who prize individuals' liberty, must be mindful always to limit, to restrict, and to divide the powers of society and the government. And this is true not only of and in liberal politics. Rather, a genuine and thoughtful liberal also combats philosophical programs that aim to reduce the human individual to a mere product of society's actions and agreements, as she must also oppose those who would reconceive us as the mere product of social forces. To abandon those missions is to forsake humans' status as those who make, not those whom other humans have made. And therein, I think, is to give up on the human person altogether. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It seems like that woman, I can't remember her name, Rachel. And it seemed okay to identify as a woman or man.
It seemed to us, you mean, not to her.
Us.
Right,
I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
what
yeah.
I don't know whatever happened.
She's writing a book.
Ah, Maybe they'll tell me that I'll know. But so that seems right to me. But could you say, maybe you did say this, but what it means for a person, certainly, so it means something different than what it means to be. So as far as, it may not be social personal identity, but nonetheless, the way a person lives.
Well, of course, the term meaning has more than one sense here. I mean, what it means in the sense of what it amounts to, what constitutes it, is a kind of metaphysical question. You're talking about the social implications, I take it, right? That the implications. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. My only point here is that I'm not sure I would call all that socially constructed. A lot of it, I think, would be socially caused, though. Right? I just want to differentiate that by externalizing it to being a member of a certain race. So, say having, blonde hair, in some times and places, has meant to be thought, to be beautiful, and other places, it's taken to be a sign that someone is, whatever, a ditzy, and so on. And that kind of stuff changes. So in that sense, the significance of blonde hair varies. And that's a kind of trivialized example because presumably nobody is, although you could imagine, right, that people are put to death or enslaved and whatever because of their hair color and so on. I just want to say that that doesn't show that the concept of, say, having blonde hair is socially constructed. But yes, certainly the significance of it will vary from the import, the impact of it will vary from one culture to another. And yes, the impacts include not just economic and social goods, but even more personal stuff, one's self-confidence, one's self-image, and so on. Yeah. So I guess my only partial disagreement was with the term construction there, but certainly, yes, those things will be socially shaped.
Process theorist, everything is all about systems and process. Part of the problem that is that means that all things are.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that some kind of reductionism or reductionist metaphysics even is in the background for much of this. Certainly, there's a very conscious anti-essentialism That's part of this, and tied to that, uh, an anti-naturalism. Sally Haslinger, who's, you know, I think one of the most, not just talented people working in this, but also someone who's deeply intelligent and who does, quite sophisticated work in this, titles her book Resisting Reality. My first reaction is that's not a program I really want to sign up with. Doesn't sound like it's going to work, for one thing, right? How likely are we to succeed if we're resisting reality? But what she's getting at is what she wants to do is to resist the tendency to treat everything as natural, fixed, and to treat especially these matters as built into nature, cooked into us, baked into us, or to use a different image, I think of it as an image, I guess some people would take it literally, that somehow we are already pre-programmed to think and act and react in certain ways, and she thinks that resisting that tendency towards realism, towards naturalizing, is an important part of a program of political and social resistance. So I think that's what she's getting at. I don't think it's a good title, and I think that it invites dismissal. I don't agree with her view, but I don't think it should be dismissed. But I don't think she helps her case by presenting, by choosing a title makes it look as if her program is deeply and in an acknowledged way unrealistic and indeed anti-realistic. But she would, I take it she would say that she's anti-naturalist and maybe at least in some sense of realism against realism, where realism, for a category to be real, is for it, as I'm sure you know better than I, in some accounts of anti-realism, anti-realism says that only what exists are mind-dependent things, and an anti-realist is about a certain area of part of the world, is to say that everything there is mind-dependent. And so, yes, she would see herself as being an anti-realist about these things, as they are mind-dependent and not just dependent on individual minds, but really on collective mentality and collective, sometimes unacknowledged and unconscious mentality, and collective actions and so on, social behavior. That's part of it, although I'm not fully, I'm somewhat of two minds on intentionality. Maybe I'll come back to that in a moment. I guess what I have, though, more in mind more is that social constructions are things that we devise and change as such, where what is, I take it, within our power is to devise institutions and duties and devise institutions which have roles and which assign duties and rights and so on to people within those roles. So I want to restrict social construction to that, to a kind of social constitution. I take it that judges are socially constituted in that all that it is to be a judge is to have these kinds of duties, privileges, responsibilities, and so on. I want to say that air pollution or climate change is not like that. Those may well be socially caused, but they're not like that. They're not, they, yeah. Um, Certainly nation states are social constructions. The word nation can also mean something like nationality. I mean, you might say that there was a German nation, in the sense of a German people, before there was a German nation state, which is only, what, 150 years old. Probably somebody who knows history and actual facts about things would be able to would be able to give somewhat more detail than I just did, right? But the German, nation in the sense of the German people, existed long before that. So the German nation, definitely, that's a social construction. The German people, not fully sure about that. That has an element of social construction to it, of a sort of informal sort. Maybe it should be seen, though, as also a kind of social causation. That is, that having been excluded for those people and having, say, these people joined together, or maybe just for other kinds of affinity, they have acted in such a way that they think of themselves as together, and so on. So far that's more social causation, what I'm calling social causation, than social construction. But it can start taking on claims of loyalty and gratitude and so on. There are people who have a kind of Volksgeist concept that will include probably that German pronunciation was terrible, but would include certain kinds of norms and so on. So far, I agree with you.
Yes, good. But it seemed like part of your argument for the stronger conclusion that even right, that seems pretty not just made some, commonalities more salient than our.
Yeah, I guess I don't think that I share your intuitions, but I guess at a certain point, we would have to decide, well, how should we describe what has changed? Should we say, is it better in the sense of more accurate, but how do we understand that? To say that now there aren't races anymore, or just that those differences don't matter so much to us anymore. Ron Mallon, a philosopher who actually was my student, a grad student at Rutgers when I was teaching there, he has a book called, I think, has a influential article, I think it's called Passing, Traveling, and Something Else. And he's dealing with this problem of variation. So he wants to say that an adequate account of construction should, of race as a construction, should accommodate the social phenomenon of, for example, black people passing for white, or in the case of racial Dolezal, a white person apparently passing for black. By the way, she was careful to say, at least once people started pressing her on it, that although she considered herself black, she didn't consider herself African American. So that's interesting too, because as I said, there is two main ways of thinking about the races. We either use continental terms or color terms, and she was willing to split those in that way. So, yeah, I guess that so Mallon thinks that that an adequate constructionism needs to accommodate passing, but as I understand it, he thinks that it's okay for a constructionist to say that races don't travel, in the sense that I can take off from, Logan, black, and land in place P, where I'm not black. So I haven't brought my race with me. Now, you could have a somewhat milder version of that where race is indexed. So when President Obama goes to, where was he just recently? Goes, say, to Belgium, it's not exactly correct to say he's no longer president. Rather, he is president of the United States in Belgium. So he doesn't have the powers to do things with respect to the Belgian system that he has in the United States with respect to the American system, but he still, while he's in Belgium, has the power to do those things within the American system. So you index the concept of being president by spelling it out as president of the United States as opposed to the president of France or the president. It seems to me that that would be a way of trying to save social construction. So do I stop being black? Well, no. I left the United States, but I'm still black in America. It's just that now I'm in place P, and I'm not black in place P. But as I suggested, so indexing the concept of race does have its costs and its implications, because it means that no one is simply black, period. It suggests that everyone who is black only by these standards and criteria, but not black by those standards and criteria, and so on. And some people are willing to accept that. I guess that Mallon does. I think that it does some violence, at least to our ordinary thinking about those things. And I think that it has, yeah, so I think that it is complicated. I mean, is it simply a more careful and helpful analysis of the concept, or is it really a replacement of what seems to be the roughly one-term predicable, is black or is white, or member of the black race, or member of the white race, with some new, rather different predicable. I mean, I could say that, I'm roughly slightly over average height, I guess, for a man in the United States. Then I go to a society of pygmies or a society of Watusi, and I'm no longer average height. But again, that's because it's a relativized term, right? I'm no longer average height within this group, but I'm still average height or slightly above average height, with respect to that other group, the one that I came from. But that kind of indexing, it seems to me, does involve a price, which I was trying to indicate, and particularly if the indexing depends not just on place, but on social norms, social obligations, and so on. I mean, some people are willing to accept that, though, that if we actually had racial equality, in a sense, we wouldn't have racial equality because people wouldn't be black and white anymore, right? That's built into the notion of being black, that one has to be subordinate within a racial hierarchy, and white, that one has to be superordinate within the racial hierarchy. So if there is no racial hierarchy, nobody is superordinate in it, so nobody is white, and nobody is subordinate in it, so no one is black. So it sort of presents the idea of racial hierarchy as a kind of asymptote, right? You can get closer to it, but if you actually achieve genuine color blindness and equality of all persons, races would have to disappear as soon as that is achieved, if not before it.
And it's very close by. It's right down here in the great part of the lecture room is on your left-hand side. Thank you very much.
Thank you.